This article deals with decision-making as analyzed in psychology. See also decision theory. In psychology, decision-making is regarded as the cognitive process resulting in the selection of a belief or a course of action among several alternative possibilities. Every decision-making process produces a final choice that may or may not prompt action. Decision-making is the process of identifying and choosing alternatives based on the values and preferences of the decision-maker. Overview. Decision-making can be regarded as a problem-solving activity terminated by a solution deemed to be satisfactory. It is, therefore, a process which can be more or less rational or irrational and can be based on explicit knowledge or tacit knowledge. Human performance with regard to decisions has been the subject of active research from several perspectives. Psychological, examining individual decisions in the context of a set of needs, preferences and values the individual has or seeks. Cognitive, the decision-making process regarded as a continuous process integrated in the interaction with the environment. Normative, the analysis of individual decisions concerned with the logic of decision-making and rationality and the invariant choice it leads to. A major part of decision-making involves the analysis of a finite set of alternatives described in terms of evaluative criteria. Then the task might be to rank these alternatives in terms of how attractive they are to the decision-maker when all the criteria are considered simultaneously. Another task might be to find the best alternative or to determine the relative total priority of each alternative when all the criteria are considered simultaneously. Solving such problems is the focus of multiple criteria decision analysis. This area of decision-making, although very old, has attracted the interest of many researchers and practitioners and is still highly debated as there are many MCDA methods which may yield very different results when they are applied on exactly the same data. This leads to the formulation of a decision-making paradox. Logical decision-making is an important part of all science-based professions, where specialists apply their knowledge in a given area to make informed decisions. For example, medical decision-making often involves a diagnosis and the selection of appropriate treatment. But naturalistic decision-making research shows that in situations with higher time pressure, higher stakes, or increased ambiguities, experts may use intuitive decision-making rather than structured approaches. They may follow a recognition-primed decision that fits their experience and arrive at a course of action without weighing alternatives. The decision-maker's environment can play a part in the decision-making process. For example, environmental complexity is a factor that influences cognitive function. A complex environment is an environment with a large number of different possible states which come and go over time. Studies done at the University of Colorado have shown that more complex environments correlate with higher cognitive function, which means that a decision can be influenced by the location. One experiment measured complexity in a room by the number of small objects and appliances present. A simple room had less of those things. Cognitive function was greatly affected by the higher measure of environmental complexity, making it easier to think about the situation and make a better decision. Problem analysis. It is important to differentiate between problem analysis and decision-making. Traditionally, it is argued that problem analysis must be done first, so that the information gathered in that process may be used towards decision-making. Characteristics of problem analysis: analyze performance. What should the results be against what they actually are? Problems are merely deviations from performance standards. Problems must be precisely identified and described. Problems are caused by a change from a distinctive feature. Something can always be used to distinguish between what has and hasn't been affected by a cause. Causes of problems can be deduced from relevant changes found in analyzing the problem. Most likely cause of a problem is the one that exactly explains all the facts. Characteristics of decision-making. Objectives must first be established. Objectives must be classified and placed in order of importance. Alternative actions must be developed. The alternatives must be evaluated against all the objectives. The alternative that is able to achieve all the objectives is the tentative decision. The tentative decision is evaluated for more possible consequences. The decisive actions are taken, and additional actions are taken to prevent any adverse consequences from becoming problems and starting both systems all over again. There are steps that are generally followed that result in a decision model that can be used to determine an optimal production plan. In a situation featuring conflict, role-playing may be helpful for predicting decisions to be made by involved parties. Analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis is the state of overanalyzing a situation so that a decision or action is never taken, in effect paralyzing the outcome. Information overload. Information overload is a gap between the volume of information and the tools we have to assimilate it. Excessive information affects problem processing and tasking, which affects decision-making. Crystal C. Hall and colleagues described an illusion of knowledge, which means that as individuals encounter too much knowledge it can interfere with their ability to make rational decisions. Post-decision analysis. Evaluation and analysis of past decisions is complementary to decision-making. See also mental accounting and post-mortem documentation. Everyday techniques. Decision-making techniques can be separated into two broad categories: group decision-making techniques and individual decision-making techniques. Individual decision-making techniques can also often be applied by a group. Group consensus decision-making tries to avoid winners and losers. Consensus requires that a majority approve a given course of action, but that the minority agree to go along with the course of action. In other words, if the minority opposes the course of action, consensus requires that the course of action be modified to remove objectionable features. Voting-based methods. Majority requires support from more than 50% of the members of the group. Thus, the bar for action is lower than with consensus. Plurality, where the largest block in a group decides, even if it falls short of a majority. Range voting lets each member score one or more of the available options. The option with the highest average is chosen. This method has experimentally been shown to produce the lowest Bayesian regret among common voting methods, even when voters are strategic. Delphy method is structured communication technique for groups. Originally developed for collaborative forecasting but has also been used for policy making. Democracy is a facilitation method that relies on the use of special forms called democracy sheets to allow large groups to collectively brainstorm and recognize agreement on an unlimited number of ideas they have authored. Participative decision-making occurs when an authority opens up the decision-making process to a group of people for a collaborative effort. Decision engineering uses a visual map of the decision-making process based on system dynamics and can be automated through a decision modeling tool, integrating big data, machine learning, and expert knowledge as appropriate. Individual decisional balance sheet. Listing the advantages and disadvantages of each option, as suggested by Plato's Protagoras and by Benjamin Franklin. Simple prioritization. Choosing the alternative with the highest probability weighted utility. This may involve considering the opportunity cost of different alternatives. See also decision analysis. Satisficing. Examining alternatives only until the first acceptable one is found. The opposite is maximizing, in which many or all alternatives are examined in order to find the best option. Acquiesce to a person in authority or an expert, just following orders. Anti-authoritarianism. Taking the most opposite action compared to the advice of mistrusted authorities. Flippism, e.g., flipping a coin, cutting a deck of playing cards, and other random or coincidence methods, or prayer, tarot cards, astrology, augurs, revelation, or other forms of divination, superstition or pseudoscience. Automated decision support. Setting up criteria for automated decisions. Decision support systems. using decision-making software when faced with highly complex decisions or when considering many stakeholders, categories, or other factors that affect decisions. Steps. GOFER. In the 1980s, psychologist Leon Mann and colleagues developed a decision-making process called GOFER, which they taught to adolescents. As summarized in the book Teaching Decision-Making to Adolescents, the process was based on extensive earlier research conducted with psychologist Irving Janis. GOFER is an acronym for 5 decision-making steps: goals, survey values and objectives, options, consider a wide range of alternative actions, facts, search for information, effects, weigh the positive and negative consequences of the options, review, plan how to implement the options. Other. In 2007, Pam Brown of Singleton Hospital in Swansea, Wales, divided the decision-making process into 7 steps. Outline your goal and outcome. Gather data. Develop alternatives. List pros and cons of each alternative. Make the decision. Immediately take action to implement it. Learn from and reflect on the decision. In 2009, Professor John Pijanowski described how the Arkansas program, an ethics curriculum at the University of Arkansas, used 8 stages of moral decision-making based on the work of James Rest. Establishing community. Create and nurture the relationships, norms, and procedures that will influence how problems are understood and communicated. This stage takes place prior to and during a moral dilemma. Perception. Recognize that a problem exists. Interpretation. Identify competing explanations for the problem, and evaluate the drivers behind those interpretations. Judgment. Sift through various possible actions or responses and determine which is more justifiable. Motivation. Examine the competing commitments which may distract from a more moral course of action and then prioritize and commit to moral values over other, personal, institutional or social values. Action. Follow through with action that supports the more justified decision. Reflection in action. Reflection on action. Group stages. According to B. Aubrey-Fisher, there are 4 stages or phases that should be involved in all group decision-making. Orientation. Members meet for the first time and start to get to know each other. Conflict. Once group members become familiar with each other, disputes, little fights and arguments occur. Group members eventually work it out. Emergence. The group begins to clear up vague opinions by talking about them. Reinforcement. Members finally make a decision and provide justification for it. It is said that establishing critical norms in a group improves the quality of decisions, while the majority of opinions do not. Rational and irrational. In economics, it is thought that if humans are rational and free to make their own decisions, then they would behave according to rational choice theory. Rational choice theory says that a person consistently makes choices that lead to the best situation for himself or herself, taking into account all available considerations including costs and benefits. The rationality of these considerations is from the point of view of the person himself. So a decision is not irrational just because someone else finds it questionable. In reality, however, there are some factors that affect decision-making abilities and cause people to make irrational decisions. For example, to make contradictory choices when faced with the same problem framed in 2 different ways. Cognitive and personal biases. Biases usually creep into decision-making processes. Here is a list of commonly debated biases in judgment and decision-making. Selective search for evidence. People tend to be willing to gather facts that support certain conclusions but disregard other facts that support different conclusions. Individuals who are highly defensive in this manner show significantly greater left prefrontal cortex activity as measured by EEG than do less defensive individuals. Premature termination of search for evidence. People tend to accept the first alternative that looks like it might work. Cognitive inertia is unwillingness to change existing thought patterns in the face of new circumstances. Selective perception. People actively screen out information that they do not think is important. In one demonstration of this effect, discounting of arguments with which one disagrees was decreased by selective activation of right prefrontal cortex. Wishful thinking is a tendency to want to see things in a certain, usually positive, light, which can distort perception and thinking. Choice supportive bias occurs when people distort their memories of chosen and rejected options to make the chosen options seem more attractive. Recency. People tend to place more attention on more recent information and either ignore or forget more distant information. The opposite effect in the first set of data or other information is termed primacy effect. Repetition bias is a willingness to believe what one has been told most often and by the greatest number of different sources. Anchoring and adjustment. Decisions are unduly influenced by initial information that shapes our view of subsequent information. Groupthink is peer pressure to conform to the opinions held by the group. Source credibility bias is a tendency to reject a person's statement on the basis of a bias against the person, organization, or group to which the person belongs. People preferentially accept statement by others that they like. Incremental decision-making and escalating commitment. People look at a decision as a small step in a process, and this tends to perpetuate a series of similar decisions. This can be contrasted with zero-based decision-making. Attribution asymmetry. People tend to attribute their own success to internal factors, including abilities and talents, but explain their failures in terms of external factors such as bad luck. The reverse bias is shown when people explain others' success or failure. Role fulfillment is a tendency to conform to others' decision-making expectations, underestimating uncertainty and the illusion of control. People tend to underestimate future uncertainty because of a tendency to believe they have more control over events than they really do. Framing bias. This is best avoided by increasing numeracy and presenting data in several formats. Sunk cost fallacy is a specific type of framing effect that affects decision-making. It involves an individual making a decision about a current situation, based on what they have previously invested in the situation. An example of this would be an individual that is refraining from dropping a class that they are most likely to fail, due to the fact that they feel as though they have done so much work in the course thus far. Prospect theory involves the idea that when faced with a decision-making event, an individual is more likely to take on a risk when evaluating potential losses, and are more likely to avoid risks when evaluating potential gains. This can influence one's decision-making depending if the situation entails a threat or opportunity. Optimism bias is a tendency to overestimate the likelihood of positive events occurring in the future and underestimate the likelihood of negative life events. Such biased expectations are generated and maintained in the face of counter-evidence through a tendency to discount undesirable information. An optimism bias can alter risk perception and decision-making in many domains, ranging from finance to health. Reference class forecasting was developed to eliminate or reduce cognitive biases in decision-making.